Welcome to The Pulse, brought to you by United Regional Healthcare System. I'm Henry Florsham with the Wichita Falls Chamber of Commerce. We are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll be rebroadcast on KJTL, Texoma's Fox 18 on Sunday. I think we've got our technology issues out of the way. My guest today, State Representative James Frank.
Hey, Henry, good to see you, sir. Thanks for
having
me.
Hey, James, welcome. Let's start off with a simple one. Give me your elevator pitch. Who is James Frank?
Who is James Frank? Husband of 30, business person, and most recently state rep for the last 8 years.
8 years.
Almost 8 years. Yeah, almost 8 years.
So share with the audience a day in the life of a state representative.
It totally depends whether we're in session or not. As you know, the Texas Ledge is in session 140 days every 2 years. And so the 140 days down in Austin is pretty much full-time legislative time. The rest of the time, the other 19 months, I'm in Wichita Falls. I probably do spend about 70% of my time on political stuff, but it's mostly constituent requests or issues. Working on policy. I go down to Austin a couple of times a month, and then do business stuff. We have Sharp Iron and Transland here in town, so we've got 140 employees, but I've got really good folks running that, and but I'm still reasonably involved in that.
So tell us about your companies. You mentioned 70% of your time you think is on legislative issues when you're not.
It's on the $600 a month gig.
Yeah, exactly. So tell me about your companies.
Okay, so Sharp Iron, actually, I was in banking until 2000. I bought a company called BW Fabricators north of town, and later bought a machine shop. So that company is Sharp Iron. We make parts for other people. We make really almost all out of metal. So we have a heavy welding shop, actually 2 shops. And then we have a heavy fab. We have a heavy fab shop, and then we have the sheet metal machine shop. So we build product for other people. Transland was a more recent. It was 2007. Bought it out of California. It makes all kind of parts for crop dusting and firefighting airplanes, and in that case, it's our parts. We do the the FAA certifications, the patents, all that kind of stuff. We market it through dealers all around the world, and that one we have about 40 employees in that. So we make parts that disperse material out of agriculture and firefighting planes.
We know that Wichita Falls has a pretty good concentration of employees in the aerospace manufacturing business, and a lot of them are more on the commercial side. Has your company, dealing with agricultural aviation, have you taken a hit? Have you seen a downturn like the other companies have?
Knock on wood, we haven't yet. Actually, Sharp Iron does some of what you would call commercial aviation. We make parts for airplane companies, and that has certainly seen a significant downturn. The agricultural aviation has really not yet. I think there's going to be some because of the weakness of the Brazilian real, which is going to make parts, U.S. parts, more expensive. And Brazil's a huge agricultural aviation market. But so far, knock on wood, not a lot of decline in that market. And most of our parts, about 80% of our parts, are aftermarket parts. So as long as those planes are flying, they're going to be buying parts. And so,
sure.
So far, so good on that.
So we've got a question from our Facebook audience, and we encourage everyone watching to post your questions. And this is from a chamber employee. Taylor Davis wants to know, what inspired you to become an entrepreneur?
I mentioned I spent the first 11 years in banking, and I love banking and the financial side of it. But part of it, honestly, my wife and I wanted to live in Wichita Falls, and my next move, I was managing the commercial lending, and my next move was going to be out to a bigger city. And we wanted to live here, but we wanted to stay professionally challenged. And, honestly couldn't figure out a way to buy a bank at the time. And so, was looking for business opportunities. And really the first one I found was a 11-man welding shop north of town. And it was just something that I wanted to kind of, sail my own ship kind of thing. And just, had the opportunity, had some people that believed in me and, helped finance it. And so that's what I've done really for the last almost 20 years.
What was the biggest surprise to you? What was the thing you didn't know when you got into that business?
Oh, wow. Yeah, the list of things I didn't know was pretty long in that business. I was a wet behind the ears 33-year-old banker with 3 kids and 1 on the way, getting into the world of manufacturing. And so there's a lot of things I didn't learn. I really had to figure out who knew the stuff I didn't. But I think at the same time, success happens not necessarily by always making good decisions, but by persevering. So I've made a lot of mistakes, but that's most of the mistakes that you make don't kill you.
So you talked a little bit about day in the life when you're not in session. What's it like when you're down there? Are you in the big chambers all the time? Are you in smaller meetings all the time? How does that work?
No, it's great. It's 140 days, and it really is a 140-day pattern. At the very start, you're getting organized. You elect a speaker. You do, because I'm in the House. You elect a speaker. Bills are filed. Then as bills are filed, you start to spend more time in committees. But the first 60 days, you don't spend any time on the floor because according to the Texas Constitution, you can't look at bills on the floor the first 60 days. As those 60 days, as you get past the 60-day mark, you start spending time in committee and in the floor. And then as you move on to about the 100-day mark, you're not spending much time in committee because if a bill hasn't made it through committee, it's dead. So almost all of your time then is spent on the floor. And every time you have a deadline, if you will, you end up spending till about 10 o'clock or 12 o'clock at night on the floor, because that 140 days is when we do all of the work. All of the bills, about 1,200 of them, end up getting passed. About 6,000 get filed. And so especially the last 80 days really is really, really busy. The first 60 days is mostly organizing. The last 80 days is really more like playing whack-a-mole, trying to, kill bad bills and then try to push your bills along. And then really, hopefully, the thoughtful work of the legislature, frankly, is mostly done during the interim. The interim, those 19 months, is where honestly, that's where you work on the big policy. During session, you're just trying to either get it through or kill it. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
Speaking of whack-a-mole, the first month or so of this COVID-19 mess, you and I talked almost every day.
Yes, sir.
Back when the county orders were changing on a regular basis, and so were the city, and we were waiting to see what the state was going to do. Describe that period for you? What was your average day like while that was going on?
Well, it's confusion, and I appreciate it. There's been a lot of criticism at all levels of government. The reality is, early on, especially in March, April, we were operating. It was like flying a plane in clouds with no instruments. People didn't know how severe it was going to be. You didn't know what the impact. You didn't know how it was going to transmit. Trying to make decisions at that point is really, really tough. And so it was confusing. It was trying to gather data, trying to deal with emotions, of constituents and other elected officials. The communication, a lot of it was trying to handle communication of what does the governor mean here. And, honestly, nobody's ever been in this situation before. All of the laws that we have in place, even the emergency powers that we have, the governor, really were set up for hurricanes and tornadoes and that type of an emergency. They weren't set up for pandemics. And so for the governor is even, honestly, I think still sometimes struggling with what does he have power to do and what does he not, and trying to make sure he doesn't overstep what he's had. So it's kind of a long-winded answer, but it was a lot of confusion and a lot of data gathering, was a lot of what we were doing, a lot of talking to people, a lot of talking to locals, talking to the governor's office, those kind of things.
Sure.
Reading, a lot of reading. I mean, honestly, I read through some of the reports, some of the studies of how bad could this be. I'm not a virologist, but I've read a number of virologist reports now that I never thought I would have read.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I spent a lot of time engaging with our local leadership during that period, and you just felt for them because a lot of these people run for office thinking, I can help our city figure out where to spend road money better or something like that. And all of a sudden they're dealing with a pandemic or a plague or making decisions that are going to close people's businesses. And I did not envy those guys and gals at all.
Right.
So you mentioned
everybody can do their job better, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Everybody, the constitutional scholars became virologists overnight, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned a little bit about why you became an entrepreneur. So you jumped out of that safety net, you bought a business, and a lot of people can't imagine even running one business. You run multiple businesses. Then you decide to run for office. What motivated you to do that?
A glutton for punishment. Henry, I was trying to figure out a way to impact things. The other choice was honestly to keep buying businesses. I love the business side of things, but really, as my wife and I talked about it and prayed about, what was next for us? Do we keep buying business, trying to grow business, or are there other things that we ought to be doing? There were a number of things about government that I was pretty frustrated with. A lot of the, particularly at the lower end, the social safety nets and those kind of things. We've done a lot of work with at-risk youth, and a lot of the safety nets are really trapping people in poverty, not helping them out. And that was something that was very frustrating to me. And so as we considered, where to get involved, I felt like either at the state level or the national level was where I wanted to do it, because frankly, that's where those programs are driven. And then, honestly, then opportunity came along with, Lanham stepping down, and, felt like it was the right opportunity for my wife and I, because we really, honestly, I say my wife and I, she's not a state rep, but, we've been married 31 years and we are a team, and we walk together through this stuff.
Yeah, my wife Kimberly's the same way. If you don't have support at home and you're out there taking a beating from people and having to spend all your time with this, it's tough.
Honestly, she's the wisdom that I sometimes lack. If she has a check in her spirit about something, I'm like, whoa, I might want to wait just a minute on this, because usually she has pretty good sense of that stuff. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Kimberly's the same way. I'll think I've got it figured out, and I'll go tell her something, and I see that look on her face, and I'm like, oops, I almost screwed up. Yeah. You and I have we both have quite a bit of experience dealing with the foster system and children in those situations. Let's talk a little bit more about your work there. Can you tell me about some progress that's been made? What are you proud of about what's been accomplished with the work that you've done?
Well, you don't feel like in the CPS system that things are ever accomplished, because frankly, there's always challenges. CPS is dealing with the absolute most difficult human problems that we have. When you consider there's 30,000 kids at any one time in the foster care system, really more than that if you count family-based safety services. These are the hardest situations in the world. So to me, I try never to say I'm going to fix something, because frankly, the system is not broken. I try to focus on, can it be better? And I think, I'm proud of the work we did in 2017 to give them the tools. Some of those were financial, but some of those were accountability. Some of those were having it as a standalone agency to give them the ability to manage it and to make decisions quickly, because that's one of the things that, frankly, most government entities are not known for, is being able to make quick decisions. And really, when you're dealing with child abuse situations, you have to be able to make decisions. So I think really just giving them the tools. But I tell you, it's something. In fact, I talked to the commissioner today about some of that. I'm in the House. I'm chair of the Human Services, which is over the DFPS, which is the parent of, not parent, but they run the CPS and the Adult Protective Services. And the implementation of what the bills you pass matter as well. And so I'm proud of progress, but frankly, there is a tremendous amount to do. So I'm not even close to patting myself on the back for anything, because there's a lot of implementation left to do.
For those of you who just joined us, you're watching The Pulse, brought to you by United Regional Healthcare System. My guest today is State Rep James Frank. James, we're going to get personal for a second. This is a question we ask all of our guests. Have you seen Tiger King?
I am proud to say that I have not seen Tiger King. I have talked about it enough, but somebody said, I don't know that there's one redeemable character on that show. And I'm like, well, and I don't really need to see it. So no, I have not seen it. I'm sorry.
You may be right. There were a couple of characters that I like, and there's the one guy that lives in Burke Burnett. I've seen him on several people's Facebook page. But if you're ever just looking for a car wreck, if you just want to completely remove yourself from everyday life and get away with something that you won't have to worry about carrying with you the rest of your life, pretty interesting show.
Well, and I don't watch anything with Tiger in it because it reminds me of LSU. So
you brought it up. Go Tigers. If the football season does not happen this year, the saving grace for me will be
Don't say that.
that'll make LSU the national champion for 2 years in a row. We'll take it.
I guess that is right. I do want you to know I was at the 74-72 game though.
Where
I was there in person.
For those of y'all
for the next 2 days.
Yeah, that was Texas A&M. That was LSU at Texas A&M two seasons ago. Seven overtimes, something
Great
stupid.
Game.
So you didn't leave. I've talked to several people that left because
I did not leave. I was there for the whole thing.
What was your best day ever in session?
You know, that's a great question. Really, when we passed a lot of the CPS reforms, because those were real major, called low bill number bills, 4 hours on the microphone so that was great and exciting. Actually, at the end of last session, 2 sessions ago, I had 3 bills passed just under the wire, including the wind turbine bill that protected Shepherd. Got passed at the last. It was literally 3 of my bigger bills, and I only get about 8 to 10 bills past a session. So it was 3 of my biggest bills, with the biggest one being the wind turbine bill, passed on the last day. Literally, I didn't know whether they were going to pass, whether they were going to get done, and they just got in under that. So it was hard to argue that wasn't the best day, because it went from being a very mediocre session for my personal legislative agenda to almost everything being done in a day. And
Sure.
That is the way the ledge works sometimes.
Well, let's talk about that issue for a minute. So
Sure.
What started happening a few years ago is we realized that wind farms had the ability to basically get their permits and start development of a wind farm very close to an Air Force base or other military bases without any real advance notification or opportunity for communities or the military, the government to say, hang on. And so you got very involved. Mayor Santayana got involved. Glenn Barham, who's the head of the Shepherd Military Affairs Committee, was very involved, and a bunch of others. So talk to us about what you actually did in that legislation to help with the situation.
Well, so not only were they able to build next to military bases, the state was incenting them to build anywhere in the state. And so what we did is we took away any of the incentives from the state to build near a wind farm. And when you make it less financially, and it was, in like one of the wind farms we looked at, it was $20 million of incentives. So it's not a small amount of money. So it essentially made people, from a financial incentive, want to stay away from military bases. There's other things that we're trying to do that the federal government is doing to make sure that the military can get involved and try to, make decisions and try to talk them out of building near it. But ours was essentially to take away the financial incentive, which honestly means mostly people don't do it.
Yeah,
there's never been, or maybe there's been one wind farm in the state of Texas done without state incentives. It's just, why would you build when you don't get the $20 million incentive? Build where you can.
Exactly. There's plenty of land in Texas to go develop.
Plenty of land in Texas.
Yeah, and the issue for us and a lot of bases is that, one of the main reasons Shepherd Air Force Base came here was because we've got vast expanses of flat land without a lot of stuff sticking up in it. And so
That's right.
when you've got brand new pilots just learning to fly, having those low-level training routes means, first off, you've got ease of access all over the area, plus the weather here is good for flying almost every day of the year. And so when you start to remove that, when you start to have wind turbines go up, there have been low-level training routes at Shepherd that they had to close because of that. And so if that happens enough, you start to run into a real issue.
Yeah, and what I liked about that is, in discussions with the locals who brought it to me, I didn't even know this issue was there. You and a number of others that work on Shepherd or work with Shepherd brought it to our attention, but we were able to do it in a way that also respected property rights, because it didn't say you can't do it. It just said, we're not going to financially incent you to make our military bases harder to use. And that's honestly what we do a lot of times in the ledge. You balance multiple things. A lot of times people think stuff's very easy. A lot of times you have two things that are competing with one another: land, property rights versus economic development. And to me, you've always got to try to balance those things so that, in the decision-making process.
Yeah, it's tough because especially in Texas, we want to talk about individual rights as much as anything.
Sure.
But this is one of those issues where, okay, you own this land and somebody wants to pay you to develop on it, but at the same time, what if it adversely affects our biggest employer, who happens to be a military base? That is just a tough conflict to figure out.
No, it is. It is.
I want to read a comment Rebecca Rutledge with Daily Planet posted. She says, we had a problem 6 months back with wage and labor, and Representative Frank's office was amazing in assisting us. Thank you.
I like that.
Yeah. That's good to hear.
That's very good to hear.
So we talked a little bit about your best day in the session. What do you feel, if you've had one, what was your worst day in session?
Well, it's kind of, I'm trying to think what sports you have to have a short memory, because there's a lot of bad days. I mean, there's a lot of days where you lose, a lot of days, most of my freshman year, with the tenor of session, I was getting rolled. I voted against the budget. It was just, to my way of thinking, was not a great budget, and it felt like all session was a bad thing. But to me, I'm a pretty optimistic person. I don't think I'm Pollyanna in that. I almost don't have time to think about the things that are going wrong, because you got to get back up and go. And that sounded more heroic than it's meant to. It's just, I don't have a lot of time to think about that stuff. Because you really almost have to get ready for the next day always, sure. Especially in the ledge, because if you get down, if you think, we got beat on that, you're not going to last very long, because you get beat a lot. There's 1,200 bills, and a lot of them I don't like, and I get beat, and you got to get ready to go the next time up.
Right. Yeah, I played defense.
Go ahead.
I played defensive back in high school, and that was the first thing they taught us, was forget everything that ever happened before this play, because you're going to get burnt. It's going to happen.
Yeah, it's one of the best things and the neatest things about the Texas legislature is the teams change some, because a lot of times you're not dealing just in Republican, Democrat, which seems like everything is at the federal level. Sometimes you're dealing with urban, rural, and literally the rural Democrats, which there are some, especially in South Texas, in West Texas, or far West Texas, will partner with, or who has water. And sometimes it's not R&D. So you can be working with somebody on a bill, and then 5 minutes later, you're working against them. And so I think that's why the Texas legislature still seems to, and I'm not pretending it's perfect, but it still works and functions relatively well. We pass a balanced budget every 2 years. We pass a lot of bills. Some of them are even good every session.
Some of them are even good. Quote of the day.
Good.
I love that.
And some of them are even implemented by the agencies the way they're written. So,
when does the next session start?
It starts January. It starts the second Tuesday of every odd year. The second Tuesday of every odd year. I think this year it's on the 13th. I haven't been forward thinking enough to look, but I think I heard it was on the 13th this year. And January.
What sort of prep work do you have to do to get ready for that? And when does that start?
I mean, to me, that's what the whole interim is for. It's all prep work. We've been working on our legislative agenda since the bills we didn't get passed last session. There's a number of bills, that we didn't pass. Some of them because we couldn't get the votes. Some of them because, maybe we had some stuff in the bill that, in retrospect, we shouldn't have had in there that, needed to be fixed. We worked on it during the interim. There's new things, obviously, with COVID and really other things that happen during the interim that come up that add to your plate. But you prepare the bills, and it really happens, if you do it right, it happens for that whole 19 months. And it's a lot different. It's a lot easier for me to prepare for session because I have a libertarian, and I would, nothing against them, but if I lost, I think I would be the first one in Texas history. It could happen. But I'm already kind of able to make plans for this coming session. There's some people who all they're doing right now is running, and they won't know until November whether they're in. Their preparation for session looks a whole lot different than mine does. They may not know that they won until early November. They've got to hire a staff and be ready to go by the second week of January. That preparation looks a lot different than the preparation I'm doing.
Sure. In my role as the head of the chamber, I'm mostly focused on issues that affect economic development. Is there anything that you're aware of or anticipating that'll improve the economic climate for us at the next session?
Well, I think Texas has historically a pretty good economic climate. I think the property taxes are such that businesses, especially capital intensive businesses, find it pretty challenging in Texas. That's the one area that everybody loves a no income tax. And I think that's awesome and is not going to change. In fact, we passed a constitutional amendment that got overwhelmingly approved to not do the income tax. So that's off the table, but we've got to make sure the property tax, which again affects businesses pretty substantially, stays, and I say under control. I would argue it's not under control right now, but that it doesn't get worse, and we need to find ways where it gets better.
Sure.
I think clearly there's going to be a lot of discussion of how much power government has to turn on and turn off businesses. Thankfully, my businesses were considered essential businesses by the luck, and I would argue by the luck of the draw. We've had this discussion. To be a business operating that somebody can just come turn you off, turn you back on with as little science as is sometimes being used. As I've mentioned before, the fact that we allow Walmart to sell the exact same thing we'll close down Kohl's for in a much more crowded environment, those kind of things make no sense, aren't backed by science, and they're done. We have to give more predictability to businesses, I think, in the state of Texas, and that includes what locals are doing. I mean, I would be very comfortable owning a business in Wichita Falls that operated that way, but I would not be comfortable at all owning a business in Austin or Dallas or some of the other places where, they're still shut down despite very, very low hospital rates and really very low COVID rates in those places.
Yeah, Mike Hendren and I were talking about that on our radio show this morning, that if government never says the word essential again, it'll be too soon.
Yeah, it's really disgusting when you think about it, because, the only way people can sit in their homes and say, hey, we need to stay at home. Well, keep in mind, they're still depending on the truck driver to stay out, right? They're still depending on the people who are making the clean water, picking up trash, making their food, planting their food, making their food, delivering it. All of those people have to stay out and take care of the people who are staying at home, keeping a paycheck. It really is a fascinating arrogance, I think, of the people that want to just say, well, stay at home because I'm fine. If you look at the people that lost jobs in the downturn, it's almost 40% of the low income people lost their jobs, and are having trouble with ends meeting, having trouble taking care of their kids. And because people are sitting in big homes watching Netflix, they think everything's okay. That's not okay. And it's not about the economy. It's about the human suffering. It's about locking people in nursing homes. It's about, we still have our day hab for mentally handicapped people are still closed, where you can't see family. At some point we've got to address a lot of those issues. So sorry, you got me on a soapbox there.
No, that's good. And if you thought there were some inequities before in our society between the haves and the have-nots, it's just going to get worse.
Well, and we were making such good progress on finally on employment of from a lower income standpoint, but from a Hispanic, those folks were finally getting wage improvement faster than inflation for the first time in a long, long time. And all of that just went away almost immediately. And yeah. I'm hoping we can safely return to that really quickly.
And we'll come back to that in just a minute, but we're going to take a break. I want to thank everybody for watching this TV broadcast of The Pulse, brought to you by United Regional. For those of you watching live stream on Facebook, stick around. We'll be right back. To everyone watching on Fox, you can visit the Chamber's Facebook page to watch the show in its entirety. Thanks again to Texoma's Fox 18 for airing The Pulse, and to Representative Frank for joining us. We will see you next week. All right, we're back. We're talking about unemployment. For the last 3 months of last year, we were at 2.9%. And you as much as anybody know, you have to hire people every day. That means if somebody's really wanting to work and they can pass a drug test and show up, they've got a job. Absolutely. And so then we knew that was going to change a little bit. In March, it got over 4%, and then April was 11.3%. And now there's signs that the feds are counting people that are that are being paid but not working as employed. And so that number could even be higher. And some of that situation is temporary because the money's going to run out. And so on the one hand, for employers, at some point, you think this might make it easier for people to find jobs, but those people are not spending money like they used to. And the big challenge we've got, it doesn't matter if government opens everything back up 100%. If your customers aren't coming out, you're going to struggle.
Right.
And so we see a lot of restaurants, for example, those are the visible ones that we see on Facebook, that now they're back able to open 75%, but they're having a hard time because people are just not coming back out. And so you go back to the Walmart example, the real solution is it ought to be any business that can keep its employees and its customers safe should be able to open up, right?
I certainly agree. I do find it funny how people kind of almost think differently depending on where they go. If they go to Walmart, then they're fine being in huge crowds. But if they go to a restaurant, they need huge separation. And all of it's just, I think all of us were just learning this new way of living. And the reality is that, the COVID is very dangerous for older people. There is no question if you have pre-existing conditions. But let's be real. If we're facing the science says COVID is less dangerous for children than the flu. There's virtually no, I know some people but that's what at least the math tells you right now in terms of, COVID deaths are happening much less for children. So let's make sure to protect the people we need to protect, but let's also let kids learn, let kids socialize, those kind of things. That is not a risk that is not worth taking. That's a risk we must take for the good of society.
What's the funniest thing you've seen happen on the House floor?
Well, there are some funny things, some near fights and that kind of stuff. But I would have to say the funniest is a very heated and animated discussion between a city representative that was making fun of and trying to remove funding for feral hog eradication, and a rural representative, including myself, but I was not the primary one talking, but I was supporting him, that understood that feral hogs are an existential threat for farmers and can literally ruin a business in a night. And there was just such a disconnect. This one person thought it was just hilarious that anybody would spend money trying to get rid of, and particularly government money, trying to get rid of feral hogs. And there were others of us, but it ended up, while it was it really was a very important issue. It made you realize how much perspective matters. And it was also kind of funny that it was feral hogs, and we won. The money stayed in there.
And that's even more magnified in Texas because we're such a big state geographically. There are people, there are people that live in the big cities that have never experienced what you're talking about.
Yeah, they think water comes from a tap and food comes from a grocery store, and they forget there's a whole chain of commerce that has to happen beyond that.
When you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I'm like 6'5", 265. I've never been little. I don't know. I guess I wanted to be a banker. My dad was a banker, and so I went to college not really knowing what I wanted to do, but I went down, got a finance degree. So I don't really know that I knew what I was going to do. I really don't. I think at some point I wanted to be a fireman, but I think that was pretty early on.
What was your favorite subject in school?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. Math was probably my favorite, kind of easiest. Statistics and those kind of things seem to flow pretty easily.
If you could go back to visit with 18-year-old James Frank, what is one piece of advice you would tell that guy?
Marry Alicia Haygood.
Hopefully that's your wife.
Which I did. Yes, by the way, that is who I married. Thank you very much.
Just to clarify for the audience, right?
Yeah, that's funny. I appreciate you clarifying that. But no, that's a great question. I hadn't thought about that. It would definitely be that. Life's short, maybe. That life is short. Not to be too serious about it, but that really, you only have one shot, and it's amazing how quick it goes, how quick kids grow up, that kind of stuff. I don't think people really realize that.
Yeah, that's a good one. So you were very engaged with local government during the first month or two of this situation. Who did you see? Who impressed you? Who went above and beyond to help this community get through this?
I mean, honestly, I think a ton of people did, and even some of the people that I was getting frustrated with, I felt like everybody was trying to pull in the same direction. I think certainly, Judge Gossam and Mayor Santiana, but honestly, yourself, I think you did a great job of stepping up and communicating. Colonel Bell, actually now General Bell at the Air Force Base, did a great job of helping. Really, a lot of people. I mean, the hospital. I think that was the cool thing to me. I realized that most other reps are not dealing in communities, and really in Wichita Falls, and people give it a hard time. I love Wichita Falls, and it really is a community. If you need something done, you can get people in the room, and you can fuss at each other, you can disagree, and then you still you make the decisions and you move on, and then you go. Actually, you used to go eat together. Now you didn't for a while, but no. So I think a number of folks did a great job. I think the health department did a great job. They're probably frustrated at me but from my standpoint, they were so focused on COVID that a little bit they were forgetting other things. But then, it could be that I wasn't focused enough on it and was, you know what I mean? I don't pretend that I have all the answers. There were just a number of people, but I think collectively we did a great job and have done a great job. It's not over.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed with the health department too. And you got to remember, they've got a different job than, their focus is different than some others, but just the information that they were able to get out was pretty impressive.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I've realized, and there's some really fascinating. If you ever get a chance to read Eisenhower's farewell address, he talks about this. But it is why politicians need to listen to experts, but you also have to understand that experts, by definition, have a very high level of focus on one particular thing, and sometimes the experts, like Fauci, he's only looking at the impact of COVID. So when you read the reports, like when you read the report done from Imperial College in England, when you read those reports, they say, look, we're only talking about COVID. We're not talking about all the other impacts. And frankly, all the other impacts is what you have to look at when you're making a political decision. The decisions made on COVID are not just COVID decisions. They are decisions that affect mental health. They affect the economy. I mean, if you look just the economic impact, everybody goes, what's the economy or grandma? Well, actually, if you look, the UN is predicting, I believe it was 1.3 million people. I could be wrong on that number, but it is a huge number of people that are going to be subject to hunger and possible starvation because of the economic downturn. That's not rich CEOs. That's the effect of ripping the economy out in the world. That there are other impacts other than just this one thing. And to me, that's what leaders have to look at. They don't just look at one part of the equation. And that's what also makes it so difficult.
Yeah. And you've got the economic impact, and then the social and mental impact too. We had Roddy Atkins on the show previously. Yeah, and for a lot of us, we've got a grandfather that's at Presbyterian Manor, and the kids couldn't see him other than through the window for 2 months. Now he's able to come out because he lives in one of the cottages. But if you've got somebody that's elderly and now they're alone and they're having health issues.
Yeah, and you have somebody that has dementia and has no idea why they've been left alone, why they've been. And by the way, that number was I'm sorry, I remember the article, is 130 million people.
Wow.
That will be that have the potential of starvation and will be food deprived based on just what we've done. And so there are a lot of effects. Yeah, and Roddy does a great job, but the mental health effects of, the education effects of not allowing our kids, despite the lack of risk for them, basically to go, people worry about having a month off. We've, in many cases, for a lot of these kids, they're having 6 months off of no education. I know the school district picked up a lot of those, but frankly, there's probably a quarter or a third of them that were just unable to get much of any education during that time.
Yeah.
That's a big cost.
Yeah. And imagine the kids whose parents are not engaged in their lives. They don't have access to Wi-Fi or a laptop or a phone. They're off the grid, right?
And I think, honestly, those are the kids that are forgotten on some of these people when they're saying, well, just stay at home. And, they're living in a 5,000 square foot house with, 6 TVs and all the Netflix and Disney Plus and that kind of stuff. That is not the world most people are staying at home to.
Let them eat cake, right?
they're staying in an apartment complex. They're staying in, a lot different places than some of the elite people that are talking about that are staying.
And this, we get complacent because we don't engage with a lot of people outside of our, the
bubble,
the normal life. Yeah, the bubble. That's a great way to put it.
Well, we all have a bubble.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we all have a bubble.
So I've got a couple of comments I want to read on Texoma's homepage on their Facebook page. Steve Jackson, who's a city councilor, District 5, just wants to say thanks for protecting Shepherd Air Force Base. I worked as an aircraft mechanic for the 80th for 32 years. It provided me and my family very well. Steve, thanks for watching. And I want to go back to a comment and a question. Glenn Barham, who's the head of the Shepherd Military Affairs Committee, has asked if you could clarify defining early notification of development to help the military and developers mitigate conflicts.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm reading that. Yeah. I mean, that is something really we don't have. So right now at the state level, we'd have to add that. I know the federal government is working on that because, honestly, the federal government, I love working at the state level. If the federal government would do what the federal government should, which the federal government is the one who should be protecting Air Force bases, and the state government should be doing the things that the state does, water, roads, schools, all of that kind of stuff. The federal government is primarily the one that should be driving it. They have a clearinghouse system already. It just wasn't functioning very well. And then, so I think it's something we can do from a state level. But it's something that should primarily be done at a federal level from a consistency standpoint and from protecting the military bases, which is really a federal issue.
What advice would you give somebody who's considering running for office for the first time?
Ooh, yeah, it depends what office. Study, so that you know what you're doing. Know what that person actually does. I think sometimes people think about getting in office because they like a particular issue. But to your point earlier, when you get in office, you don't get to just work on the issue that you wanted to work on. When you're in office, if you're mayor, Mayor Santiano doesn't get to decide what he wants to work on all the time. All of a sudden, he's working on COVID, or all of a sudden, he's working on a drought. And same thing with me. I can go in wanting to do one thing, but as your representative, your job is to represent. As a mayor, your job is to, you represent everybody in that. So make sure you understand what it is. I think the other is network. The more people you know in a community, the more, the broader cross section of people the better. I think one of the things I really never realized how good, both being in banking and then being in the business world, being involved in things like the chamber and a ton of nonprofits and involved in church and church leadership. Those kind of things all made the move, frankly, to politics very easy because all of a sudden, when I decided to run, I knew tons of people, and not just the movers and the shakers. I just knew tons of people that got stuff done. And so I think the more you network and the more you get involved, the easier a move into politics can be.
All right. Next piece of advice. What advice would you give to a young entrepreneur?
I'd probably be the same. Network. I think none of us are really all that bright in our own. Maybe it's just me, but the more people you know, the more people you talk to, the more people you ask their experience, the more you learn. And I think some people think, well, I just know how to do it. I'm going to go do it. And I think part of my success, or what success I've had, and I've certainly had some failures as well, has been because I hadn't been scared to ask people, and I've made a habit of asking other people that I find successful, how did you do it? How did you do it? And I tried to learn from them. And the other is to go for it. I talk to people all the time that tell me they want to go into business. Well, wanting to go into business and going into business are two different things. I can want to do something, but if I never take that step, then I never went into business. Try it. It might hurt, but it might not.
The hardest thing to do is start. We've all got ideas. We all have ideas. I got a long list of stuff that I want to accomplish, but starting is always the hardest thing to do.
Yeah, I had the board chairman of the bank I worked at when it was Parker Square a long time ago told me this riddle, I guess. He said there's 5 birds on a wire and 3 of them decide to leave. How many are left? How many are left? No,
I don't
there's
know.
5 because the 3 just decided to leave. Until you actually flap your wings, nothing happens. You know what I mean? You can't just decide to go into business. You actually have to do it. And so I think some people are just, they don't want to make that, they're scared. And I would say it's not going to hurt. And most of the time, the failures you can move on from, and learn from them. Some of the biggest mistakes I make, I chalk up to my MBA, which I don't actually have an MBA, but I think at this point I have an MBA in business.
You've earned it.
Yeah, I've earned it and paid for it.
All right. Next piece of advice. If somebody is interested in fostering or adopting kids, what advice you give them?
Well, first, if they're even thinking about it, I would say thank you. I would definitely talk to other people. It sound like a broken record. Talk to other people that have done it. And then I would advise doing some, making sure you work with at-risk kids. Most of the kids that you're going to deal with in the foster care, they're awesome kids, but they are just like the 2 boys that we adopted, but they have, there's a reason they were in the foster care system, and there's special challenges that we didn't have. There's special blessings, but there's special challenges that we didn't have with our, my wife and I's 4 biological boys. And again, there's special blessings with that, but it requires a different type of parenting. So I would just encourage them to, talk to people. And then I would also encourage them to start working with those at-risk kids. I think one of the things that helped Alicia and I, we had spent about 15 years working in the bus ministry. And, that was with almost all at-risk kids and working at Straight Street and other places. So we had to, we certainly weren't perfect at it, but we knew what we were getting into.
Yeah, I found it amazing because when I was younger, I don't think I ever heard people talk about fostering and adopting, and I don't know if there was a bigger stigma to it years ago. But once we started fostering, and then once we adopted, it seems like every other person I talked to either was a foster parent, or they had been foster kids, or had adopted a kid, or was adopted themselves. And so I think there's a lot more open conversation about it nowadays.
Yeah. Well, and it may also speak to you're hanging around some really good people. I mean, seriously, because it does. I mean, the people that will do that, it's a very hard thing.
Yeah.
It's a very challenging thing, but it's incredibly important and needed.
That best thing we ever did.
Yeah.
Who inspires you?
Broken record. My wife inspires and challenges me. I used to, I'm trying to think. My brothers challenged me. My dad did. Mom did. If you're talking famous people, Billy Graham, until he just passed away, was my favorite living person. Now I still don't know who I'm going to replace him with.
Let us know when you figure it out.
Yeah.
To our audience, you are watching The Pulse, brought to you by United Regional. My guest today is State Rep James Frank. James, earlier you told us the shocking news that you did not watch Tiger King.
Yes.
What do you watch? What do you watch?
Right now we're watching Blacklist, which is actually pretty. I mean, it's a great show. It's a little gory, violent sometimes. And then if I want to give my wife a break, we might watch the Hallmark Channel. Although sometimes it's a little more difficult to follow the plots there.
They have plots.
There's only one movie in a Hallmark.
They're all the same. They just change scenery.
They're all the same, but they're all simple. When life is complicated, sometimes you just want to watch a Hallmark movie. Is the way my wife. But I only watch it with my wife in the room. I have never yet watched a Hallmark movie by myself. So good. I'm proud of that.
Good for you. Yeah, it was funny when this first started. We have Netflix, and I've used it a lot. But then Kimberly, we also have Amazon Prime because Kimberly shops every single day. But I had never messed around with the TV, with Amazon on TV. And so for some reason, I started looking and found all these old shows and started watching like the first season of, the Dukes of Hazzard and Columbo. And we got stuck on James Garner, the Rockford Files.
Rockford Files, sure.
We talk about simple. If you look at crime shows today, there's 10 different characters and they do crossovers and there's all sorts of plot lines and stuff. He's the main character. There's a couple of supporting actors and there's one plot and it's almost always done in one episode.
Yep.
And it's awesome. And I wish I had seen more stuff with James Garner because he's amazing.
Yeah. Yep.
So what about reading? Do you read?
Yeah, I read some. Actually, I've just gotten, I ride bikes a lot, as you know, or you may not know, but I do a lot of bike riding. So I've started doing the Audible books. I've got earphones that are good enough to do that. And it's a couple of great books. Just got finished with Martin Luther King's Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. I vote community. He's fascinating. Actually, one of the most well-read people I've ever, just brilliant, man. But also from a political standpoint, Arthur Brooks has a couple of great books, Love Your Enemy and Conservative Heart, that just do a phenomenal job of explaining, frankly, explaining why limited government and frankly, a conservative mindset is much better for people than essentially the government, than a huge government. I think there's a hugely important, appropriate role of government. I'm not not an anarchist, and I'm not but I also think that people are best when they're able to encouraged and challenged and rewarded, frankly, for taking care of themselves. That that earned, the kind of the pride of work and that kind of stuff, to me, is tremendously important, and is something that we've really lost. And that's one of the reasons I love the economic development and those kind of things. It's one of the reasons I love what you do, and I think it's so important that we challenge people. And really, unfortunately, there's too many people that feel like the American dream is dead. And I think we need to make sure structurally that it is not dead, and that we need to encourage and challenge and reward people for persevering and doing that. Too many times we reward people for doing bad behavior, which is something no parent would do, but yet we do it. If you're an irresponsible business, and you blow it, then we're going to bail you out. If you make, the worst decisions you make, the more we're going to reward you, which is the dumbest. Yeah, but it's the way government works. And
you're right. So you mentioned that you choose community. What can you see? What can Wichita Falls do, whether we're talking about government or just the community? What can we do to make our area more entrepreneur friendly?
I say network again. I think sometimes everybody cloisters in their own bubble, and sometimes the folks that have made it or the folks that are successful aren't talking enough to the people that are trying to figure it out. I think basically the model of the older teaching the younger, and the mentorship, and the what do you call it when the craftsman, the apprenticeship, that is almost non-existent. And so I think it's something that we need to do a better job. If you're a 16 or 18-year-old trying to figure out how to get started, how do you do that? We need to try to make sure they have a way to, to start their trade. We need to make sure that we're, facilitating that communication.
I've got a DC question. I don't know if you have the answer to this or not, but Steve Haviland with Think of IT has asked a question. Has the Texas leadership in Congress considered supporting the Banking Association suggestions about forgiving PPP loans under 100K? Any idea?
Well, yeah, I'm not in Congress, but I'm in the Texas House. Most of the PPP loans, as I understand them, they're going to be forgiven. In fact, there was just a flexibility added that gave you almost 6 months to spend it. So the way I'm a little confused about the question, because the way I look at it, unless I'm reading it wrong, virtually all of the loans of any size are going to end up with 100% forgiveness. Initially it was just 2.5 months of expenditures, or no, maybe 2 months. I can't remember the exact details, but so I may have to punt on.
Sure, we'll follow up with Steve, because I know Steve's been real involved in helping put on some webinars, helping people navigate PPP and EIDL. I don't know if James just disappeared on me for a second, but I do want to mention this while we're waiting for James to come back. The other part of the federal relief program is called the EIDL. It's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. It also comes with a potential grant of $1,000 per employee up to 10 employees. And so there's a potential $10,000 grant available for companies under 500 employees. And so check it out. Let me know if you need help with it. You can search the SBA website. Just Google apply for EIDL and you can find it. It's a real simple process. James, are you there? He's been real involved.
I'm back on the other.
Some webinars helping people navigate. I don't see you, but I heard you. I don't know if James just disappeared. here on it for a second, but I do want to
I switched rooms on you.
Okay, if you could mute that video so we can just hear you and not that.
There we go. Is that better?
Yeah, that's good. Okay, we got about 5 minutes left before we need to close the show. What else? We talked earlier about starting. What haven't you started that you've got on your bucket list?
What haven't I started?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know what's next. It's interesting. You know, I've got the political. It'll be interesting to see where that goes. This coming session. That's what I'm committed to being in the Texas House for the foreseeable future. As long as I'm doing that, I'm probably not going to do a lot of acquisitions or anything on the business side because, frankly, I just don't have time to do any more than I'm doing from a business side. I hadn't started having grandkids. You know, no pressure on my one son that's married or the other two that might be close. So I haven't started on that.
All right.
If you have any ideas, let me know.
No. So what are your long-term political plans?
I love it in the Texas House. I looked, obviously we just had a congressional spot open up and I looked at it and chose very easily not to do it, frankly, because I just didn't feel like it fit. You know, I'm 53 and with where we are right now with the businesses still there, I didn't know what I would do with them. And honestly, I don't really feel like I want to spend the almost probably 10 to 20 years in the U.S. Congress that you need to in order to make an impact. You know, you're one of 435. I'm finally in a position in the Texas House. I was a chair for the first time last session and a chairman. And so I was really able to make some significant impact or what I hope is significant impact in that role. And I really think that's what I need to be doing for the foreseeable future is to make an impact at the Texas House.
Sure. Who's the cook at home?
My wife does all the cooking. I will cook, but if I cook, I'm going out to a store. The two things I cook Saturday morning breakfast, eggs, bacon, sausage, and biscuits every Saturday morning. And then I grill. But I always think it's funny. I get, I'll grill steaks, burgers, and brats. I get all the credit. And when I look at it, my wife has done everything else. She shopped, she's fixed all of the sides, typically either marinated the steaks or got them ready. I throw them on the grill, flip them a couple times, and I get amazing credit for cooking dinner when really she does almost all that work. So I recognize it, but I still take a bow.
Heck yeah, that's the typical manly man stereotype, right? The wife, she buys everything. She made sure we had clean plates and utensils. We go out there. She does everything. She's washing the dishes after the fact. Although I don't know about you, we've got kids washing the dishes now.
Probably only 3 to 4 years ago, I started washing the dishes every time, and my wife loves it every time. It's like the sexiest thing I can do is wash the dishes. And so I really, no matter who cooks, I usually do the dishes.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, if I had any advice for young married people, it would be that, guys, wash the dishes.
Got it. Or teach your kids to. We've got one of our daughters. That's Jennifer's job is washing the dishes and putting them up.
Yep.
Where did you go to high school?
Ryder. Yeah, I went to Ryder High School. Ryder. So we started dating in high school.
Gotcha. So we got about a minute left before we have to wrap up. What's your take on this whole idea of new high schools?
I'm going to pass on that. I'd like to see the idea. I think it's unfortunate the timing because I think it's going to be tremendously challenging if we're at 15 or 20% unemployment. Yeah. And honestly, I think it's also a challenge because I think there's a real divide about whether it's one school, two schools. You know, it that makes it really hard. And I think unless and until we really get in agreement as a community of the direction, it's hard to be voting on the direction and a bond issue at the same time, because if you're a no on either one, you're going to be a no. And that's not telling you my personal feelings. That's just telling you I think it's going to be hard to pass unless people agree that this is the right direction to go. And then we can work on the bond, but that's not my gig.
No doubt. It's a tough one. All right. We got 30 seconds left. Anything else you want to share with the audience?
No, I really appreciate you. I appreciate the chamber. and what y'all do for economic development. But I would just encourage all of us. I hear people fuss sometimes about economic development. Economic development is all of our jobs. We all need to be cheerleaders for the community. We need to be doing whatever we can to make the quality of life here better and to help bring businesses here in town.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks, James. Well, that's it for today's edition of The Pulse. Thank you to Representative Frank and to our sponsor, United Regional Healthcare System. The show can be found in its entirety on the Chamber's Facebook page, at texomashomepage.com, and this Sunday on KJTL Texoma's Fox 18. Join me next Wednesday with my guest, Wichita Falls City Manager Darren Liker. We'll see you then.